Okay, with that, I will let Jen start her presentation. Jen is no stranger to the ITE audience. Jen has been very active in ITE. I let her talk about the different roles she played on ITE and also a little bit about her background. Jen, if you don't mind, it'd be great hearing from you.
Oh, thanks, Madri. Yeah, I've been really lucky to serve with ITE for a long time. It sort of started when I was a student at the University of Manitoba, and we together with Jeanette Montefar, who, if you don't know, she's another powerhouse in Canada in transportation.
Yeah.
Did you get in the big room?
No.
No? Okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna come and check.
Oh, just a friendly reminder to mute, please. Yeah, and I was able to get involved when I moved from Winnipeg to Calgary, serving at the section level, and then was for the last 10 years I've been serving on the CIT executive, including as through the executive and then as district director. If anybody is thinking about running, I definitely encourage you to do it. Put your hand up, or reach out at any time. I'd be super happy to answer any questions about what it's like. Is the treasurer position really that terrible? It's come a long way. It's not. Okay, Madri, do you just want me to go straight into my presentation?
Yes, Jen, if you can bring up your slides, that'll be great as well.
Perfect. Yeah, so it's such a treat to be here today and to share this project I've been working on called the Neighbourhood Streets Pilot Policy. I'm picking my screen and I believe it's the correct one. Nope, it's not. Let's see, stop sharing.
Can you go to your slideshow screen, Jen?
Yes. Yeah, at least I think so. Okay, that should be working. Seems to be on my end. Yeah, great. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Again, such a treat to be here today to be sharing this project. I love being really informal, so if anybody has any questions at any time, please do jump in. Makes it a little bit more fun, but also we should have time at the end for questions too. So I've been working on replacing our traffic calming policy from 2003. It's a long time for a policy to go unupdated at the City of Calgary. We typically target 5 to 8 years. And so you can imagine that the way we do our work in community has changed dramatically. And so we really needed new policy direction to sort of speak and represent our best work. And that's really what the goal was through this project. Is our values have changed. The toolkits we're using is considerably different than just traffic calming. So if you think back to the industry definition of traffic calming, it's targeting speeding and targeting shortcutting. But when it comes to enhancing neighborhood streets, we do so much more. And that's through a number of infrastructure changes, but it's also through the way the cities grant permission. So as much as we, build wheelchair ramps, bike lanes, we build in missing sidewalks. We also do things like allow communities to come together in block parties or to paint the pavement, different kinds of placemaking projects that really help make community. And so that's really what we wanted reflected in a new policy. A few other elements we're trying to blend in is to find opportunities for more shared decision making with communities, really involving residents in a greater way, and to correct our intake process. So right now we have the petition process, and it's really challenging for residents, particularly in some areas of the city. At the moment, it requires you to be in touch and working with Calgary Police. And so in some of our communities that maybe more ESL, that often can come with, major feelings of discomfort with working with police officers. We also wanted to collaborate and find more efficiencies. We had a traffic calming program, but we really wanted to be able to bring this more across the corporation, so that when we're doing major intersection or major interchanges or infrastructure projects that we're building the traffic calming we needed to support communities that are directly adjacent to those projects. So I mentioned in the title that this is a pilot policy. This is sort of a new approach that we're taking, and when you hear pilot, you often think quick, and that's not always the case. When we also think about pilots, think about it in terms of changing culture. So that can take a while to prove that something can work and belongs. So I'll just break down the timeline a little bit more to give you a sense of the steps that have gone into the work so far. So starting in 2018, my colleagues Jonathan Chapman and Nathan Carswell, they really spent time developing a 10-year review of our traffic calming program. And so that's where, some of the impetus of this update is coming from, is really they had the chance to look back and say, oh my goodness, we've never done traffic calming in the Northeast. Obviously, there are problems in those communities, but the intake process was broken, is broken, and so they weren't getting their fair share of enhancements. From there, in 2019, we were starting to work in this new space, really empowering residents, working through tactical urbanism, lots of new tools, but we wanted to see if there was internal alignment, like how much work would we have to do to drive the corporation in this new direction of a new policy. And so I hosted a couple of workshops where I asked participants, no matter where they were in the corporation, if they were in the public art office or they were in roads design or in in law or in enforcement, you are running. They were tasked with a mock community and sort of to be the project manager of a traffic calming project using their skills. So not a transportation engineer or planner skills, but using the skills that they use on a day-to-day basis, and got them to think about, well, why am I responsible for this project and what can I bring? And it went really, really well, and we were able to show that, in fact, the way we support neighborhood streets and communities is well beyond transportation. From there, I have a couple of pictures coming up, but we co-wrote a pilot policy. So again, I worked with our innovation lab, which is a super great resource that we have at the City of Calgary to create stations that speak to a policy. And I'll show you a couple slides about how that worked. And then from there, we started applying the policy. You've maybe seen other policies being engaged around the City of Calgary. It's really hard, even for mobility experts and certainly the public, to read a policy and know what it means. So we wanted to engage through projects and outcomes rather than the policy document itself. That was our plan. And we're just really trying to see if the plan is working a couple of years later. So we ran 8 pilot projects, and then we came this December with the results of those to ask Calgarians, what have we missed? In 2021, again, we ended the year with public and stakeholder engagement, and I'm just now working through the public and our stakeholders. They did tell us things that we had missed, which was so perfect. We really missed some important things. So I'm adjusting the policy right now with a plan to bring a final version to council in June. So what did it look like to co-author a policy? I'm just going to skip one slide. If you can imagine a lot of policies, a lot of frameworks, they're not so different. You'd have a vision, you have some values, some elements to that policy. And so what we went with was there was some research about, what does make good policy, and what we did was create a station for each segment or element of the policy that we knew would be incorporated. And then we asked representatives, again, lots from transportation, but from all over the corporation, to help contribute to that policy. I then took all of the feedback. We did 2 separate, they were drop-in sessions, so you could spend as much time as you wanted contributing different ideas and thoughts. I then took both of those and saw if there was alignment, and there did seem to be, and then wrote a policy. And then a couple months later, we sent it to council, and we said, we're going to start using this, and over the next couple of years, and we're going to edit it, make it better, and come back and ask for your approval. The additional benefit is that we had an election in the middle, and so this really gave us the chance to keep moving forward and not knowing, what would be the change in direction of our new council. We were pretty delighted, again, with our new council. We were really progressive, so I'm more at the point, whereas a couple of years ago we might have been worried about our leadership. I'm now cautiously optimistic that the policy goes far enough and is progressive enough for this new council. So another threat to policy is always implementation. I think everybody knows, you can have the best intentions, but how does it get implemented? So I was able to do engagement with our transportation colleagues, also in those colleagues in pathways, to say, well, this is the essence of the policy. What do you need for us to implement it? And I visited all those groups, and together we came up with 84 different ideas, and we were able to sort of assemble them in according to how we would carry out those ideas. So I know this text is super small, but I'll read it out to you. But just the yellow ideas were things we could just do right away. We just start, that makes a ton of sense. We don't need permission, let's just go for it. These green circles, we just had a few pieces where we need culture change. So again, those are the big pushes. Might not happen right away. There's support, but we're going to need culture change to get moving along. We also had things like explore and create. So in some cases they're great ideas, but they would need sort of a tangible tool to be able to move ahead. And then the fourth, communicate and collaborate. As everybody knows, communicating is the best and the hardest part of our work. And so sometimes it's just being really more deliberate, having the right timing to be able to advance projects. So we can, I'm really looking forward to what kinds of questions you guys have at the end of this. I'm going to leave how we built the policy and talk a little bit about what we learned by applying the policy. And so I'm going to start with some of the outcomes. So at a sort of big picture outcomes perspective, we got to spend time hearing from resident concerns. So I mentioned we chose 8 pilot projects. And we tried to pick a huge variety, so really small, intersection or small street concerns that residents had. We also partnered with our colleagues in land use planning who are working on, you may have heard, like the North Hill plan, other multi-community land use plans, to say, well, how can we advance traffic and community mobility changes, those quick wins through the planning process. We also had individual projects like at the community level where we would really dive in and start with finding out resident concerns. What are the locations in the community that are working and not working? And as I mentioned, we had never done traffic calming in the Northeast. So we wanted to investigate what it would be like to go into a community who hadn't asked for us to be there. So we started working with the community of Dover, just to learn, again, how do we knock at the door and say, we think you have to have mobility issues. We think you have to have streets that could be better. And to really find out what that experience would look like. So again, we learned about finding approaches to uncover resident concerns. We talked about empowering those community leaders in different ways. Safety enhancements, I think Internationally and definitely in Calgary, there's huge more like a growing interest in evidence-based decision-making and safety. We were able to retrofit streets. We were able to pilot street labs or temporary setups. We were able to manage community volume, which, so if we go back to what is traffic calming, it's lowering speeding and managing community volume, but the engagement and the impacts of those two types of work are totally different. So we were able to really modernize our engagement and communications through those two different kinds of streams. Again, we were able to calm traffic, put in temporary and permanent interventions that would slow down vehicles. Also build missing links, engage with youth, and beautify neighborhoods. So when we look at the 8 projects we advanced, and we tease out everything we built in each of those 8 communities, we end up with this map or infographic that we were calling the elements of great neighborhood streets. And we wanted to say, this is from the 8 communities that we work with, our team. These are all of the things that communities asked for and we were able to action. With one exception, is the bee hotel. We didn't actually yet build one, but we know that working with nature and biodiversity is really important in neighborhoods. So we cheekily chucked this in because we got close in one community, even though it didn't happen. But so you can see, a huge variety of tools and tactics and techniques. What is a bee hotel? Great question. So you may be hearing more lately about pollinator corridors and the importance of bees and how we can support them. So bee hotel would be like a wooden structure that you could build, lots of plans online if you wanted, to let like bees home, really. They would live in there. Somebody is going to know way more detail about this, but yeah, if you would like to build one, a lot of our native bees are fantastic and they're not aggressive, and so you could have one in your home, or maybe not inside your house, but in your backyard at your home. Oh, I wasn't sure this would play. So I'm just now going to go into a few of the projects. I won't go through all 8 because that would be too much. But you can see we tried a totally new approach in Silver Springs. Silver Springs Boulevard is a 2-lane carriageway separated by median. And so we converted the outside curb lanes into a 2-meter buffer with TC curbs at every 25 meters. That's these yellow blocks, traffic calming curbs. And we were left with a 1.8 meter bike lane, or wheeling lane, we're saying, because you can also scooter in them as well and skateboard. This street, was meant to have be a regional connection, and it really didn't ever. So, it's an arterial with about 6,000 vehicles a day on it. So lots of speeding, there's super elevation. So not only were we able to accommodate active modes, we were also able to work with the local school to add art and really change the nature of this street. Oh. There we go. A few wins and lessons that we learned along the way. So this was a project that was undergoing repaving. So the pavement overlay program was in line. So we tried to find locations where we could add curb bulbs and speed humps at the same time as paving. And I mean, it seems like very obvious, but it's not work we do every day. Our budgets just aren't structured that way. So it was a great opportunity, great willingness by the teams to really collaborate and deliver more for Calgarians. The other piece, so the TC curbs, the yellow curbs I mentioned, really effective, really easy to install. We had some concerns about aesthetics, so we're actually looking at a new product from Canmore called Canmore Curbs. And yes, I see your question. What are Kenmore curbs? So they're really similar, but they're modular. So they come in a few different shapes and sizes. And we're looking to use those in late summer to just a small extension to the Silver Springs project. I'll get you a picture after I have a few more slides. In Rosemont, we had some really interesting project where we work with the community, really lovely community association, very engaged. And it was interesting to work with the local school to see their priorities, share the student priorities with the community, and then see what the community asked for. So at the end of the day, kids were really looking for more color, a safer place to ride their bike, and then community association and residents were really asking about safer crossings for pedestrians. So sorry, I saw the question. I'm going to come back to the questions after because I'm going to get too easily distracted. But yes, from snow operations is fine on speed humps. But our buses and fire trucks like them less. So we often use speed cushions or we avoid streets with buses. Again, so really the win, we're able to really work in a nice way with the students, lots of interest, and we have an education planner who helps us align the curriculum goals with how we deliver content to the students. So if anybody's looking, we have some great information we could share and presentations. If you have the opportunity to engage on projects with students, we definitely can support that. The challenge was around implementation. We just missed the pavement overlay, and so that was a shame, but it's okay. In Panorama Hills, we were able to do a street lab. I mentioned those sort of temporary setups. In this case, we actually did one that spanned a whole week, which was a new thing. It held up really well. You can see we just used pylons to the shape of the design curb bulb with flowers and things that we could buy at Michael's. I work with students at the University of Calgary Urban CSA who helped put this up and work with, and that was a really great experience for everyone. We also built a first play street. This is on a closed piece of pavement, and the secret to that were milk crates. Kids love milk crates so much. It was unbelievable. So the win was that pop-up. The challenge, the reason we went this way is we didn't have the right design support at the time, so we were unable to build something more permanent, but really was a great way to work and build support in the community for more traffic calming. I mentioned the North Hill project earlier, which is an opportunity to tie in with our land use planning processes. And so we built a couple of temporary TC, using TC curbs, some diagonal diverters. Some really interesting lessons learned on this one. And a bit of text on this one, but it was really great to be able to often Calgarians, they'll engage on policy, but they don't necessarily see change right away. So to be able to deliver change as part of that policy process was very exciting for us. One of the biggest challenges was these diverters went in at October 29th, which, it's not the best time for walking and wheeling. So we really need to work on our timing when it comes to active modes infrastructure. And we could have, again, diverting traffic is much bigger of an impact than speed humps and slowing down vehicles. So I think we could have done a better job with communication. Sorry, I need a sip of water. Excuse me. So yeah, we definitely learned a bunch about timing and resourcing, and I think we're better equipped for the next round of projects. Oh no, I got these dry spots. Sorry, guys. Must mean I'm talking too much. Okay, I'll whip through the rest. The second one was non-compliance, was a huge issue. So on that, in some of our traffic calming, cars would decide they didn't like it and they would just drive around. I've been chatting with other cities in Western Canada, and they say the same thing. It's about a year of driver non-compliance. So we had to really reinforce some of our traffic calming with rocks in the boulevard. And again, very similar to other cities, but we weren't really ready for that. So we'll know for next time. We also looked at, what is the value of those sort of one-day interventions or 1 week versus some of the temporary solutions are actually takes a lot of design and coordination that, maybe those kinds of pilots aren't necessarily as good of a bang for your buck as just doing the pylon setups. All right, a few more slides. Again, so I'm going to move into the public engagement and our stakeholder engagement. And just what we started our workshops with, we're asking about what role do you play in making neighborhood streets great. And we had about 140 people participate, super exciting. And, we really wanted to get a sense of how, all of the different ways that people contribute to neighborhood street. And you can see that we did really get that broad perspective. Also, similar question, when you ask stakeholders or members of the public, I've done this experiment a few times now, what do you love the most about your neighborhood street? Treats is always the biggest one, kids. So it's not always the things we think of as mobility experts and transportation professionals, but also, so I think take away from this slide that, connection to community and to residents is really important. So we had really great participation in our public engagement. Maybe you saw we had 45 bold signs around the city. Maybe you even participated. We had great feedback. And so we asked a question around, who should the city design for? Knowing that decisions can be really controversial in neighborhood streets. The greatest responses was around people walking and wheeling, and then for kids. So really thinking about our vulnerable users. So it was great to see that alignment between city and the public. Again, what do you wish for your street? Number one was trees, and then feeling safe. So again, I think this is really good insights for us as mobility professionals. In terms of what we missed, so we did 3 rounds of engagement, internal, and then stakeholder and public engagement. And really there was a lot of overlap in this engagement. The things that we really missed, accessibility. Of course, that was in the policy, but not, it was felt that we didn't go strong enough. And it wasn't, some days, I don't know if some of you feel this way too, it just seems like, of course, we design facilities that are accessible. Of course we do. But I think it was a good reminder to me that no, we have to keep pushing for accessibility. We have to get better at it, and we have to keep it top of mind. So that was a great gap that was identified to me. Also a desire to talk more about maintenance and upkeep. And so I've worked with my colleagues about how to better incorporate that into the document. To talk about sustainability and green infrastructure, yeah, so those are the big themes. So this is in the policy, we describe the additional toolkits that contribute to neighborhood streets. So the previous policy would have been just this one, this traffic calming. And so when we asked, what was missing, a few pieces around law and enforcement, more about green infrastructure and climate change were the big missing pieces from this particular part of the policy. Again, safety, accessibility, climate, environment, and the law. The laws we write, govern the kinds of behaviors we want to see, and in many ways, those are out of alignment in Alberta. So just a quick timeline slide, and then I think we can open up for questions. But again, we're just doing the engagement analysis, seeing what that our stakeholders and the public wish us to strengthen in the policy. In March, we're going to be making those policy updates and then going back to the stakeholders to say, thank you so much. Here's the gaps you told us about, and here's how we've incorporated it. Do you think that's adequate? Are there other gaps? Do you think we're ready for council? And then April, May will be, it takes a long time to get a report ready for council. And so we'll be doing that. And then I'll be presenting to committee and council in June. And then the really big, the other major part of this work is to develop that equitable intake process that I mentioned before. So thank you so much. Those are the slides, and I know there's been a bunch of questions come in. So I'm excited to get those too.
Thank you very much, Jen. It's a great presentation, and it's obviously a topic that's of interest for many of us. I will go through some of the questions that came in through the chat. Maybe let's start with feedback and engagement. Have you collected feedback from people with accessibility issues and autism?
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat that one more time?
Have you collected the feedback from people with accessibility issues and autism?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Yes, so many of our stakeholders that participated come from the Access Design Committee. And so that's a semi-public committee with people who live with different kinds of disabilities, from our visually impaired community to those in wheelchairs, and folks who have difficulty or can't hear. And so we had such great participation, and that's where we got that feedback that I need to add more around accessibility. I'm also taking this policy to the Access Design Committee in the next 2 weeks to get more input and to talk about how I'm going to be adapting the policy to better to reflect those needs.
Thank you for that, Jen. I'll just add on to that. We don't typically engage students and school, teachers or even young kids on many of our transportation projects. What made you think about that, and what are some lessons learned exclusively just engaging kids?
Yeah. So we have started, we engage, I think, more and more with kids. I think they have great perspectives. Kids are way better at imagining a future that's different than it is today. And so we have tools that make it so we're better prepared, so we can get that meaningful data. We do have a website for the Rosemont project, so you can go and see the different kinds of activities we did run with them. I think from a project perspective, there's other advantages in terms of building more empathy. Often we'll hear from residents, why are you making changes? There's no problems in our neighborhood. And so, when you can tell the story through residents, it can build that empathy and help tell the story of why we need safe streets. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And when art is involved, why not? Right?
Yeah.
So I encourage you to read some comments from Edward here with some concerns that he typically observes in the neighborhood. And I think no surprises here. We hear a lot about these.
Yeah.
The main question he has is, have you figured what funding will be required to achieve the plan and maintain it?
Yeah, so great comments. Thank you, Edward. So we have a Neighbourhood Streets website, and we have put resources there that you can access. And so when you see bushes overhanging or sidewalks, we do really encourage you to report those. We have a really big city, as you know, it's pretty sprawly. And so residents, it's really a great source of information to help us know some problems in our city. So yeah, I really encourage everyone to use 311. When it comes to snow and ice on the city, I know the city has made major changes, and Councillor Farrell was a big advocate and was able to I think it was an additional $8 million just for sidewalks. And so I think, you know, there's more desire to look at equity, and part of that is acknowledging that, you know, more of our vulnerable populations use sidewalks, and there really has to be equity across travel modes. So so I think we'll start to see over time more equity across the modes. But that does take time. We are also going into a new 4-year budget. So I think there'll be, you know, some of that funding may be made permanent instead of one-time funding.
So you're saying agencies should look into equitable funding sources for different modes of travel for citizens.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe I can add, what is your prioritization criteria? How do you choose your project location?
Yeah, great question. So for the pilot projects, we had a set of, you know, temporary criteria, but we are building a new intake process that will establish the right criteria. Definitely speeding is going to be one of the biggest drivers. Sometimes, you know, the data may not point to speeding, but if the geometry of the road is terrible, I think we need to start looking at that as a set of data as well. But again, there's so much demand for traffic calming, so that I think we really need to be more transparent and more equitable and really more data-based.
Okay, I think you briefly talked about this, but would you want to elaborate on any concerns from snow operations on the use of speed humps?
Sure. I mean, the speed humps that we design are designed with maintenance in mind, so I don't think that's a big concern. Again, we use speed cushions in places where buses might be operating and on key fire routes.
Okay. Are you okay to answer a couple more questions for us?
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
No,
it's so dry.
Take your time. No rush. We still have 20 minutes, and we have 3 more questions in the next question. How would an organization not involved in the initial stakeholder engagement be added at this time?
I saw that from Kim. Kim, I would love to add you to any of our stakeholder. I'm writing your name down right now, but I think we did invite by Calgary, but would love to have your perspective.
Okay, Jen, feel free to type in the chat if that works better to answer these questions. I can read the question out loud, and you can either choose to speak or just type in the chat.
Thanks, Madri.
How did you address the education gap when engaging communities? I think that's a great question, especially when you have a wide range of citizens.
Yeah, that is such a great question. And one of the things we try to do, and I think Tony Churchill does a great job of this, is getting people to start at the problems. So often residents come forward with, you know, I need a stop sign, I need a speed hump, instead of saying, you know, my street feels unsafe, there's speeding on my street. And when we start from that problem perspective, then we can really look for the right solution. And actually, one thing I did want to add is really, there's our toolkit, our arsenal is so broad. It can, so in places where we don't have speeding, you know, we may not want to invest in a speed hump or infrastructure changes, but there should be something available so that residents can maybe add placemaking or activation, because it's really that activity that also helps drivers be attentive. You know, when they're expecting to see activity, people biking or walking, that is really what changes people's behavior. So I think it's education from a couple of streams is, and we definitely noticed on a couple of projects that, you know, one of the questions about the diverter was, well, why do we need to have diverters if they're really high impact? Why can't we have a roundabout? And so trying to remind people that, you know, roundabouts are really great for slowing vehicles, but where we have a volume problem or a shortcutting problem, it's not really a significant enough deterrent.
Yeah, thank you. That is a great question. Often people don't know what they don't know, right?
Exactly.
So talking about that education and toolkits. Also in
Mhm.
terms of, bridging the gap between communities, did you look at multiple languages in your communications, or what are some tools that you've used?
Great question. So we, on projects, will look at sort of the language makeup of a community and how much is ESL. We, in terms of our advice from our experts, it's sometimes there's a role for translation, but not always. Most households will have someone who does speak English, and most of our engagement right now is online. So that's not always the best approach according to our experts, but sometimes it is, and sometimes it's really important. Yeah, we've been a little bit more limited than we'd like through COVID and not being able to have face-to-face. So lately we've tried to organize walks so people could come and ask, the project team questions. That can be really, really useful, is to really, I think part of the challenge with COVID is that projects are just less tangible. They're less, there's no person behind it, right? It's just our Engage page, which is a super amazing resource, but people have been really missing those interactions, is what I've noticed lately.
Yeah, for sure. Very well said. Another question, has lighting design, particularly with respect to conspicuity, being considered as part of the process? If so, are changes being considered?
Yeah, great question, Cam. And so, as you may know, in Calgary in the last 7 to 10 years, we changed our lighting fixtures. And so there have been changes that we did get requests to look at lighting levels, and that's something we can do. As you know, it's not easy to retrofit like the spacing of lights, but that's sometimes what we need to do. Yeah, so yeah, we've identified a few locations. I don't know if we've made any changes to lighting at this time, but it is something that's really important, and especially as we think about safety from being seen and being able to safely cross the street, but also thinking about street harassment and security of being able to, especially we hear a lot about women feeling uncomfortable to transfer between the train and the bus at night. So really lighting, it plays that double role of safety and security.
For sure, for sure. Tony has raised a great point here. It's easy to do certain things when there is a residential community, but when you have businesses along the street with a lot of, goods movement around it, how do you approach these? Are planning level changes being discussed to assist with this, the context, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is really a big picture question. It's really up to our policy and achieving, the kinds of designs that we have written about in municipal development plan and the Calgary transportation plan. So I think we're also, my colleagues Samad and Miriam are updating our design guidelines, our DGSS document, which is a tool that is attached to our complete streets policy. And so I think it is happening over time. And I think with the emphasis on climate change, there's going to be even more, I think we need to help Calgarians understand the costs of poorly planned community in terms of, transit ridership, and just the cost of those communities they're really unaffordable. So there's so many reasons we need these walkable communities. So yeah, are we going to get rid of vehicle trips immediately? No, but I think as we build out our active modes infrastructure, we can have good suburbs. There's, it's not one or the other. And I think, in some of the suburban communities we worked in, like Panorama Hills, there's some really great bones to them, but there's also some terrible streets. Like the 90s were super unkind. And so we're going to have to have some big plays. I think in the meantime, we've been able to try and reinforce, safer crossings at key locations, but at some point we might have to make some bigger plays. And I think even, communities like Panorama Hills they have the pond systems and lots of pathways. That's how you sort of travel with active, by active modes. And, you know, mid-block crossings have been a challenge to accept, but that's really, you know, that's what we need in those communities to make active travel viable. And I think wayfinding, we have a project getting off the ground to build up, you know, we have street signs for everyone, but we don't have any really pathway signs. So I think that would really help.
Okay, that is good. I think we are evolving in providing just for cars, providing for people, and
Yeah.
well, in several different modes, and planning and the interplay between planning and street use and land use. It is really a big picture item, and I'm hoping we will evolve even more.
We definitely are.
Yeah. So you need to tell Jack about that curb. What is that? Cargo bike. So there's a great compliment from him on the cargo bike to do tell him or share more information about that. But he does have a question about, maybe it is related to goods movement in cycle track, but maybe not. Are there plans to convert the downtown cycle track network from the pilot curbs to a more permanent setup?
Yeah, great question. So at the end of the pilot, council did approve keeping it, but they did say to not spend any more money. But you may have noticed the great investment on 8th Avenue. So as part of the repaving on that street, they did build up proper curbs. It's so beautiful. Go have a ride on 8th Avenue. But I think it'll take some time to move that transition. Yeah, thanks, Jack. Great question.
Okay. What is the process to move from temporary to permanent solutions?
Another really good question. Budget. But in some cases, for example, the Silver Springs Boulevard, where we had the TC curbs, we really did, it was a new cross section. And so you want to collect a lot of data to show that it was slowing speeds, that it wasn't causing a lot of shortcutting, and then it was a sort of an attractive solution for people wheeling. So I think with all of that data, we're able to show that it is a great project. And so I think in that configuration, we could leave it for some time before looking at building something more temporary or permanent. And I think we're also going to experiment with these new Canmore curbs. They're still temporary, but because they're just have a nicer aesthetic, we think maybe the community would be happy keeping those longer term.
Right. What were your conversations with enforcement bodies, Jen? There's a question about this. Enforcement does not necessarily get actively engaged with perceived minor issues within communities. You know, speeding, yes, they do come and do some enforcement there. But have you had any conversations with the CPS?
Yeah, great questions. So that's not my experience, Cam. I think we send folks to Calgary Police have an intake form, and if you fill that in, especially if it's near a school, police will come and enforce. There are, also provincial rules around where police can enforce, so that does play a role. But I think we want to get to the point where we acknowledge that enforcement alone can't solve the problem. We really do need street changes. Today, today's intake process, it does actually require you reach out to police and have them sort of confirm there is a speeding problem through data. I hope that helps.
Okay, here's a loaded question coming from Jonathan.
Always.
I'm seeing such a polarization among the public, manifested on the street by people refusing a diverter by driving on someone's lawn or cutting chains for a temporary closure. Is this just a new reality, or is there hope that engagement can get to a broadly supported design?
Such a good question. I think it's hard when people are perceiving that they're losing something without being able to have a conversation with the people who have lost something and we're trying to reestablish the balance. I think trying to build up that perspective that we have lost the balance in some places, right? Not everywhere. And we're just really correcting it. I think we're also seeing people being tired of giving up for others. So I actually am a little bit concerned, you know, coming out of COVID, the way people are talking about freedom and caring for others. Yeah, super loaded question, Jonathan. I think in-person engagement with those street trials where people can see other, you know, when I don't experience the benefits, but I can see others, like how meaningful those benefits are to others. I think that can really help close the gap. I also know that people are normally distributed, so we are not going to convince everyone, but I think we can close the gap in a more meaningful way. And I think, you know, often traffic calming, just the speed aspect is not really a big deal. So I think maybe we can scale down a little bit on the engagement when it comes to building curb bulbs, but then ramp up the kind of engagement we do, and really linking that engagement to the vision. I think that was sort of, we could have made that connection stronger. Like the vision of this street is for this purpose. It's not operating at that purpose today or that vision today, and so these are the changes.
It's very well said. Vision, context, what funding you have, and how much can you maintain.
Yeah.
It's only if it is that easy to solve, hey, but one step at a time, maybe one project at a time.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a storytelling component in the policy to show the successes?
I love that question. Storytelling is so important. Yeah, so mostly through pictures. So we've worked hard to have pictures, you know, with permission so we can continue to use those. When I did engagement with council last week, I had a couple of councillors complain, well, this is the problem with traffic calming. You only show pictures from the inner city. So I had to take that to heart. So yeah, really, this policy has to look like, and so we'll be doing that. But is there a bigger, other than through photos? Not so much, but maybe in the next iteration, Kim, because I think that's definitely the future.
Maybe some testimonials from citizens.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, one question, and we'll see if there are other questions coming up. Otherwise, I'll make up one. What are the long-term strategy for these quick win implementations? Is there a process to receive feedback from the community, or are these meant as an interim phase before a more permanently implementable changes when it can combine with another project?
Yeah, such a great question. Thanks, Dennis. Both. So in Silver Springs, we collected a lot of data. It was a true pilot. We wanted to learn how the design would work. In some cases, we have a known safety problem. So it's a key location, and so we're able to use those temporary, you know, bricks to make a difference now. And so there isn't necessarily a timeline. You know, we would maybe reach out to, or we would be able to replace it with something permanent, you know, when we're paving or doing other work in the project, or, pardon me, in the area. Yeah, so it's a little bit both. And I think we're also learning as a city about what designs work. So we might be doing pilots when, you know, it might be more obvious that it's going to work, but we're a little bit, well, you may have not heard this about the City of Calgary, but we can be risk averse at times. So the temporary allows us to really try those designs out, you know, in a kind of try before you buy approach. So they really can help us with a few different approaches or problems.
Okay, thank you, Kim, for your last question, so I don't have to make up one. Are intersections identified as repeat offenders for vulnerable road users being prioritized for pilots?
Yeah, great question. We're doing this now. As you know, council gave direction to lower the speed limit on residential streets, and now I'm working with Tony Churchill about lowering speed limits and changing the designs on collectors. And so we're definitely starting from that harm perspective. So we've been mapping out what are the communities that have the most injury collisions. So don't necessarily care about, Vision Zero tells us, property damage only collisions are not, I'm not saying it's not a problem, but it's not the problem. The problem is where are people being injured and killed. So definitely starting from that perspective. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for your questions, and thank you very much, Jen, for your patience answering those questions, even struggling with your dry throat. It's a very engaging conversation that we had, and why not, right? Everybody is interested in neighborhood safety and experience as residents ourselves. So thank you very, very much. I think we'll be making a donation as a speaker on your behalf. We haven't, I don't think we have finalized to which organization we're going to donate this year, because some of the feedback we got from December, I think, is to look at other sources. Traditionally, we've been funding or donating to engineers, but why only engineers? Let's be more inclusive. Are there other organizations that we can promote? Is what the team is looking at. We will let you know what we find, and we'll keep you up to date. So with that, the session today has come to a close. We'll meet in March again with yet another technical topic: how to do traffic forecasting post the pandemic. How is back to work changing, and how to consider these changes into developing traffic forecasting for your projects. So tune in for more details. We'll catch you next month. Have a great rest of the day.